Hi, everybody. My name is Rafael Mendiola. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm coming from Boston, and I'm excited to visit Krakow for the first time and connect with the React Native community. Today, I want to discuss the React Native development workflow and talk to you about how I'm exploiting some untapped potential as I'm building my own React Native app with Expo. I realize that I'm going to be talking about Expo, and I'm doing it right at the mouth of the lion here at Software Mansion. Some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about will probably be really obvious, so please take this as an opportunity to hear the perspective of a developer who doesn't really have the time to keep up with everything that's happening in the React Native space. Here's the agenda for the talk. First, I'll talk about how awesome I am and why you should listen to me. Although being here, my confidence is quickly dropping. Then I'm going to go into a meandering rant about my perspective as a React Native developer. Then we're going to go into a random tangent about Doom for some reason. And then we'll do a live demo of this mobile development environment that I built for myself. And if we're lucky, I'll probably have demo issues. And then I'll end by awkwardly lecturing you on how to improve your development process. So let's talk about me. I want to talk about my background so you can understand where I'm coming from in giving this talk. I can probably call myself an experienced React Native developer at this point. I've been building React Native apps since 2016, working as a mobile development consultant, as an employee, and I like to build my own applications for fun. Some projects that I've worked on include a React Native app for a university fundraising platform, a React Native application for a healthcare startup in Boston. I was part of a travel startup named Lola, and I helped them pivot from an iOS travel concierge app to a business travel app built in React Native. A few years ago, I joined HubSpot to integrate React Native into their existing Android and iOS applications, and that was a really interesting brownfield integration project. And I currently work at Hinge Health, developing an app for virtual physical therapy. I originally joined to build a design system for their very large React Native application, which has over 90 contributors. And for fun, I've built a Japanese flashcard application called Benkyo. This was a really fun project for me to work on, but unfortunately, I wasn't able to continue shipping it due to App Store and Play Store restrictions. I've also built a piano chord dictionary app called Ongaku, available in the Play Store and App Stores. And I built this so that I could learn how to work with Expo, because I started out as a vanilla React Native developer. And right now, I'm working on a new Japanese study app called Itsumo Benkyo, which uses the ChatGPT API to generate random short stories and illustrations to help me study Japanese daily. And I will use that project to show you the mobile development environment that's the subject of today's talk. So I want to talk about my perspective as a React Native developer. Throughout my career, I've had the opportunity to look at the React Native development cycle from a few different angles. I worked at startups, scale-ups, and large enterprises, and I'm familiar with the frictions that development teams have at different stages over the lifetime of the app. The app can get complex. It can be hard for one person to fully comprehend all of it as it grows, and it can get stale and difficult to work with. I've also implemented design systems for mobile apps, and I've been advocating for design systems for about the same amount of time that I've been a React Native developer. I've seen how difficult it is to implement cohesive design changes across large code bases. And I'm also familiar with the frictions of being a solo developer. I like both design and coding, and while they're often seen as separate disciplines, I view them as complementary aspects of the same game, creating a great mobile app. When you're a team of one, it's really evident that there's a significant operational gap between creating a design in a tool like Figma and then implementing it in code. So I've invested a lot of time in React Native because it's faster. It's not about using JavaScript or TypeScript or React. For me, it's all about operational efficiency. I'm probably saying stuff that everybody in this room already knows, but I like that you can share code between web and mobile. That's operationally efficient. I like that it has hot module reload, or what's now called fast refresh. That's operationally efficient. And I like that there's cross-platform compatibility with iOS and Android, and that's operationally efficient. So to me, the spirit of React Native is about finding ways to do better and faster. So React Native has gotten better over the years. However, the development workflow hasn't changed much since 2016, when I started. I still build applications by having my editor and simulator side by side. The main thing that has changed for me is that my editor used to be VS Code and now it's Vim, but otherwise, this is still the same developer setup that I was using in 2016. Now, back then, Hot Module Reload made this an amazing experience. This was a huge improvement over developing applications on Xcode and Android Studio. You could make an edit to a file and see the change automatically reflected on the screen. That was awesome. But after working this way for so many years and having gone through many different projects, I think there's a few issues that I want to solve for myself. First of all, I want to see the app splayed out. When I'm working with a complex application, I find myself wanting to see all of the screens at the same time, like I'm looking at a blueprint. Looking at one screen at a time in the simulator can be very limiting and hide a lot of problems, especially when you're working with a huge, complex app. It's hard to conceptualize what the app is, and it's difficult to make sure that the whole app has a consistent, coherent design. This is a problem that gets worse and worse as a company grows and you start having many different siloed teams working on different parts of the app, and often there is nobody making sure that the whole app experience is cohesive. The other problem that I want to solve for myself is I want to bridge the gap between design and code. Figma is a very nice tool and it's great to use when you're first ideating an application, but once you have the app implemented, going back and forth between Figma and code feels like a lot of waste to me. That's just my personal opinion. Any changes that you make in Figma, you have to make again in the code base. That's how things work. Keeping Figma and your code base synchronized is pretty tedious. And a lot of the times I make design changes while I'm coding, and I have to go back to Figma to keep it up to date. I just want the output of my design efforts to just go straight into the code base. Before I go specifically into how I solve these issues for myself, I want to talk about this book called Masters of Doom that I recommend that people read. It's about the history of id Software and the development of the game Doom. Hopefully everybody here has heard of this game, but if you haven't, it was a huge blockbuster game that was a first-person shooter that came out in the 90s. I read this book around 20 years ago when it first came out, and there was one detail that stuck with me because it made a pretty big impression on me. From the book, I learned that one of the reasons why Doom was so successful was because the company made themselves a map editor called Doom Editing Utilities. This was a pivotal tool in the creation of the game. This editor allowed designers to create, modify, and visualize the game's levels in a more interactive and efficient manner than previously. This is why the levels of the game were so good, because designers were able to iterate efficiently. Before graphical editors like this, game developers often had to manually code levels using text files. This process involved specifying coordinates, object placements, and other level details in the text editor, which was both time-consuming and error-prone. Without a visual interface, developers could not see their changes real-time. They had to compile and run the game to see the results of their edits, making the design process really, really slow. So I took a couple of lessons from the fact that id Software not only made a great game engine, they made a great game, but they also made themselves a map editor. When I read this book, I hadn't really thought about this. And the first lesson that I got was invest in accelerating your operations. id Software recognized that the standard way of creating map levels was slow and tedious, so they invested in tooling to make that process faster. And the second lesson, which is related, is invest in visualization. It is easier to understand something when you see it rather than when you have to interpret code. And in this case, it's way easier to understand the map level when you're able to visualize it as a blueprint. So going back to React Native, the question for me is, how do I give myself the same kind of advantage that the Doom map editor gave to the development of the game? How do I give myself the ability to visualize better, iterate on design more quickly? Well, there are a couple of tools that we can take advantage of when we're talking about mobile applications. First, we can take advantage of Expo and React Native Web. How about building your mobile application on web with the guarantee that it will work on mobile? Expo lets us do this right out of the box. And if you're able to build your mobile application on web, then you can actually explode your application like a blueprint so that you can actually see it all at once. And we can also leverage design system tokens. We usually think of design systems as a library of components, but once you get into the code implementation, it really all comes down to token definitions. In the context of design systems, tokens are standardized reusable variables that store the visual design attributes such as colors, typography, spacing, and other stylistic elements. These tokens act as the single source of truth for design specifications, ensuring consistency and uniformity across different components in the design system library. So if we can find a way to control the tokens, play with them, and commit them to code, then we can make ourselves a design tool that lets us iterate fast on design while putting those changes straight into the code base. So let me show you how I've leveraged these tools to create myself a development environment that solves the problems that I've been talking about. And this is how I'm taking advantage of Expo and React Native Web. This is the development environment for my mobile application. This is an interface that is built into my mobile project itself, so it's faithful to what's on the code base. And here, you can see the application splayed out like a blueprint. And it's a little bit like what you would see in Figma, actually. And the application works. I can log into it just like I would on mobile. Let me log out and log back in. And I can click on things and navigate around the app just like I would on mobile. Let me just give you a quick tour of what the app is. These are all stories written in Japanese that are generated by AI using the ChatGPT API. These cover images are created with DALL-E, and they're based on the content of the story. The only art direction that I gave was to make the images using pixel art, but other than that, ChatGPT generates a story, and it generates the image that goes along with it. And you can see here that this is a randomly generated story in Japanese, and I have the translation down here. And I have a list of vocabulary and kanji elements. I like to study using flashcards, so the whole point of this application for myself is to be able to read a passage and study the Japanese vocabulary using flashcards, and I can do a swipe. And this is all working with React Native Gesture Handler. I'm also using the ChatGPT Voice API to read the passage so I can work on my listening comprehension. So if I hit play, you can hear the Japanese narration here. So the app is not the point of this talk. I just wanted to give you some context for why I'm building this. The point of this talk is really the editor that I'm building around the app. So I really like working this way because I can see how the whole app reacts to state changes. So I have a tab here on the side that shows me Redux state, and I can see what the state is doing as I click around the app. So I'm just going to log out again, and you can see that my Redux state is reset. I can log in again, and you can see that my Redux state is populated. And as I click around the app and make some changes, you can see that my Redux state just changes. So I just really like having a studio around my React Native application with the guarantee that this is going to work on mobile. And now let me show you how I'm leveraging my design system tokens. Here on the left side of the screen, you'll see a list of color tokens that I've created in the codebase. Do you ever wish that when you use the Chrome inspector and change a color, that value would automatically be added to your codebase? Wouldn't it be awesome for that to be automatically modified? This is what I'm trying to accomplish. This is the time-saving thing that I'm trying to do for myself. I can click on the value of a color, get a color picker, pick a different color, and boom, my app changes if I reload this thing. So let me just show it again. I can change the color, and my app automatically changes. And I have the simulator here on the side to show you that this is also working on mobile. I'm glad you guys like this. The best part about this is that the color changes are made right into the code base. Let me show you here. If I do get status, get diff, actually, then you can see here that my tool made a change to the code base. So let me just keep playing around with this and change a bunch of colors. As you can see, even the editor is using my design system tokens. And I can change a bunch of things around the app. And what I really like about this is that if I didn't like this, let me just show you again that the changes that I just made were added to the code base. If I don't like what I did, I can just do git checkout dot. And boom, I am back to where I was before. So I can bring version control to my design workflow, which is really nice. So I think this is really cool. Let's take a look at the technical implementation. I'm not sure how to take you through the code. I'm a little worried that I'm going to go through it kind of fast because I feel that all this stuff is actually kind of easy to implement. If you're an experienced developer, you'll see that there's actually not a lot of difficulty here. So let me show you my app.tsx. In order to make this web interface that shows the screens, you just need to make yourself a new route to a component, and you can call it IDE or something. And this is literally the code base for my mobile app. I'm adding it to the mobile app. So you can see this, that this is just my Expo mobile application. The IDE isn't a separate project. It's part of my mobile project. And this just works because Expo has the ability to run your application as a mobile app or a web app. In fact, I'll show you. So let me take out this query param from here. And you'll see that this is literally the mobile app. All I did was just add a new route that I'm using on web. These are the same screens that we were looking at before. But I have a special route that I use to render all this stuff on mobile. So if we dig into the IDE component, this has a component called Screen Designer. And the Screen Designer is actually this component right here, this big component right here. And it has two parts. It has the tokens on the left side, and it has a workspace on the right side. And I am not doing anything tricky. I'm not doing any kind of like static evaluation or anything like that. I literally just have the same screens. I am just importing it, and they're just hard-coded inside this workspace container. All of the screens are contained inside screen container components that just let me make sure that the screens are constrained to a mobile aspect ratio. And one other thing that I'm doing here is I am passing a designing prop. This is because I want the screens to behave a little bit differently when they're in this mobile development thing that I built. Let me just show you what happens. When I click on a story, I can see the story show up here. If I take this out, if I take out the designing prop, if I restart this, when I go to a screen, this will actually navigate out to another screen. So this is why I'm passing this designing prop, just because when you're in this context, you just want the screens to behave a little bit differently. You want to intercept the navigation stuff. All right, so let me just restart here. Now, let me show you how the design tokens are updated. The basic strategy here is put the tokens in a JSON file and somehow update that JSON file. And let's take a look at the tokens file. I just have my tokens in a plain JSON file, and I'm able to update this tokens file from the color picker by running a separate server from Metro, which in my project I'm calling token server. Let me show you. Oops. And this server has the ability to write directly to the file where my tokens are. The fact that this is a JSON file, that the tokens are in a JSON file and they're not in a TypeScript file, makes it very easy to manipulate. In their interface, when I use the color picker and pick a new color, what the color picker is doing is making a post request to the token server with the name of the color token that I'm modifying and the new value for that token. That's why this changes. Let me show you this in Postman. All that I'm doing is passing a payload that has like a token path, the location of where the token is, and a new token value. So when I hit send, I will get token updated successfully, and the background of my app is just changing. And as you can see here, if I do git diff, it shows me the changes that I've made. And this is all just happening through a post call. These are all just techniques that all of us know. There's nothing special here. It's just thinking about how to use the tools differently. And I'm just going to check out and reset this file. So the token server, what it does in the post call, where I call update token, it just does three things. It reads the tokens file, it sets the value of the token in that file, and then it writes it. That's it. There's nothing more than that. And what's really nice about this is that this works because fast refresh will pick up the changes to the file and automatically update the modules that require it. That's why I'm able to do this. And it shows up on web, and it shows up on my simulator. And I love this because it eliminates the operational gap between working in Figma and then having to do the work of adding this to the codebase. In my opinion, as a developer, design contributions should go directly into the codebase. And we're able to accomplish that if we focus on making token manipulation easy. As a developer, I care about source of truth design. The source of truth for the design of an app is the codebase. Put the design changes in the codebase. So let's go back and see what else is possible. Oh, this was my demo time thing that I didn't get to show. There's the potential for additional tooling if you take this concept even further. I would love to be able to see the navigation routes visualized here. It would be great to see lines showing how the screens are connected. If you've ever worked in an app with a complicated stack, you might appreciate having that. I would also love to see my analytics here. It would be great if I could get this integrated with Mixpanel so that I can directly see how my users are interacting with the app. I would also love to do my visual regression testing on the web version of the app instead of the mobile version, because that seems to be easier. If I have a reasonable confidence that what is displayed here will be what's displayed on mobile, then it's just probably easier to do visual regression testing on web. And If this was being used in a large organization, you could imagine how this could make conversations with stakeholders a lot easier. Do you know of a PM, a director of engineering, or a CEO that would love to see this blueprint view of the app? You probably do. So we're reaching the end of the presentation. I think this is a really neat idea that has a lot of potential. I can tell you that this is the way that I'm going to be working forward in my personal work. And I hope that this makes sense and that I've done a good job of communicating the value of building a mobile development environment on the web using Expo. And hopefully, I've inspired you to try this with your own apps. I think this is much easier if you're a startup that is already using Expo. If you're a mature company that's been building a vanilla React Native app for years, I think this might be a little bit harder to implement. It's going to take some work. But if you're already using Expo, you should just try this. And here are my takeaways. I recommend that you invest in accelerating your developer operations, particularly in visualization. I think that's in line with the spirit of React Native. It's asking the question, how can we build in a smarter, faster way? I recommend that you try leveraging Expo's web capabilities to build yourself an application studio or IDE or whatever you want to call it. If you're already building the mobile app in React, you already have the skills to build yourself some really, really nice tooling. I also want to encourage you to recognize the opportunity gap that exists between designing in Figma and implementing design in the codebase. I think it's more operationally effective if design work results in direct contributions to the codebase. If you're smart about implementing a design system well, you can reduce your design iterations to just token manipulations. I only show you colors, but imagine if you could manipulate spacing, imagine if you can manipulate corner radius just like this. And my last point, finally, please keep on thinking of clever ways to build apps faster, because AI is going to eat up our jobs. That's it for me. Thank you so much for listening to me.